My name is Dr. Nathaniel Cross, and I am a wildlife biologist specializing in predator ecology. For the past 12 years, I have studied wolves across North America, from the dense forests of the Upper Peninsula to the windswept plains of Montana. Yet nothing prepared me for what I found in the Alaskan interior. I came here under the guise of research, tracking packs, collaring individuals, mapping their range. But my true purpose became something else entirely. In those endless miles of tundra, glacial rivers, and jagged peaks, I encountered things that biology cannot explain, creatures that should not exist in any world bound by natural law. The job began like any other. My team had been granted temporary use of a ranger cabin deep inside Denali's wilderness, 50 miles from the nearest road. We were supplied by bush plane twice a month, and once the pilot lifted off, the silence of the wild folded around us. The air here carries a peculiar weight. The mountains loom as if alive, breathing with glaciers that groan at night, their echoes rolling through the valleys. I always thought of wilderness as empty space, waiting to be filled with data. Out here, though, it feels more like we're the ones being measured, scrutinized by something older than time itself. Our research focus was a pack reported to range along the Toklat River basin. Locals claimed it was unusually large, with rumors that some individuals rivaled the size of small ponies. Exaggerations, I assumed. Hunters always tell tall tales. Still, the data intrigued me, and I convinced the university to fund a full season of fieldwork. With me were 2 graduate students, Haley and Connor, and a field technician named Will, a former Marine who had traded deserts for tundra. 4 people against a land that stretched farther than the eye could dream. The first week passed with routine. We checked camera traps, logged scat samples, and mapped tracks. Wolves are ghosts of the wilderness, seen less often than heard. Their paw prints told us more than glimpses ever could: direction, speed, the age of the trail. Yet on our second week, something shifted. Tracks appeared that did not fit. At first glance, they seemed wolf-like, but the stride length was far too long. More disturbing was the shape: elongated, splayed toes, almost human in spread, but ending in sharp claw marks. Will frowned when he measured them, his tape trembling slightly in the wind. "That's not right," he muttered, then refused to say more. We set up additional cameras along the ridges. Nights grew colder, and the sky cracked open with auroras that shimmered like green fire. Beautiful, yes, but unsettling when paired with the silence. Wolves should have howled. Coyotes should have yipped. Instead, there was nothing. No birds, no insects, no sound but the rush of distant rivers. Even Haley, usually optimistic, admitted the stillness was unnatural. "It feels like the whole valley is holding its breath," she whispered one evening as we logged data. I told her it was just the scale of Alaska. But deep down, I sensed she was right. The first anomaly came on the 12th night. At 12:14 a.m., one of the trail cameras captured movement near the tree line. I was reviewing footage when the image froze me cold. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, upright. Its limbs were long, too long for proportion. Even blurred by motion, I could tell it was wrong. The eyes reflected infrared in a way no animal should. They burned white in the dark, fixed on the lens, fixed on us. The frame cut out as if the camera had been struck. When we retrieved it, the casing was shattered, though there were no paw prints, no boot prints, nothing but disturbed moss. Connor wanted to pack up and leave. He said the grant wasn't worth whatever was out there. Will snapped at him, voice hard. "We're not running from shadows." Yet even Will slept with his rifle across his chest after that night. By day, we continued research. By night, I felt eyes in the dark. The sensation was not paranoia, it was presence. Once, while crossing the river flats, I found a caribou carcass half buried in the gravel. Its ribs were peeled back like cage bars, organs scooped clean with surgical precision. No wolf does that, no bear either. The flesh was untouched by scavengers, though it had lain long enough for frost to gather on the exposed bones. Haley gagged, but I forced myself to sketch and photograph. Data was data. Still, the image clung to me like frostbite, seeping deeper the longer I carried it. 3 nights later, Will shook me awake. "Hear that?" he hissed. Outside the cabin, the silence had broken. A low chorus echoed from the valley, not wolf howls, not human voices, but a blend of both, elongated wails that rose and fell in unison. They surrounded us, reverberating through the timber like the walls themselves vibrated. I grabbed the rifle. The sound grew closer, circling. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ceased. In the morning, we found tracks around the cabin, a perfect ring pressed deep into the frost. The prints were the same elongated shape as before, and there were dozens of them. That morning, Haley refused to leave the cabin. Connor suggested radioing for extraction. Will and I argued it down until the plane came. Our next supply drop arrived at midday. The pilot never landed. His plane circled once, then banked hard and vanished north. Supplies never fell. Later we learned no flight had been scheduled. The station confirmed no bush plane had been dispatched to our sector. Whoever flew above us was never logged in official records. Panic grew like mold. Rations dwindled faster. Connor started talking in his sleep, muttering words none of us recognized. Haley swore she saw figures moving on the ridges at dusk. Tall shadows pacing with the rhythm of wolves but upright, their heads tipped back as if scenting us. Will cleaned his rifle compulsively, though his hands shook more each day. And me, I kept writing, logging every detail, forcing reason to hold even as reason drained away. That's what science demands, isn't it? To keep observing, even when observation breaks you. The night it came for us, the aurora lit the valley like fire. Green light shimmered across the snow, shadows warping in every direction. We heard the wails again, closer than ever, not circling, approaching. Haley screamed when she saw the first one step into the clearing. Tall wrong, its arms bent backward, joints reversing with sickening grace. Its face was both animal and human, skin stretched thin, mouth too wide. Behind it, more shapes emerged, each one shifting like silhouettes torn between forms. They moved as a pack, but not wolves, not people, something between. Something that should never have crawled out of evolution's grave. Will opened fire. The sound cracked across the valley, echoing against mountains. Figures scattered into the trees, but the wails only grew louder, overlapping into a deafening chorus. I dragged Haley to the cabin, while Connor froze at the threshold, muttering his sleep, words aloud. Will shouted, firing into the dark, until one of the shapes lunged from the tree line. I saw it seize him, limbs wrapping like roots around prey. His rifle clattered, his scream cut off. Then he was gone. The rest pressed closer, circling our cabin. The walls groaned under their weight. Haley sobbed. Connor whispered words I dared not understand. And me, I clutched my journal, ink smearing with sweat, knowing this account may be the only trace we leave behind. For in the Alaskan wilderness, there are things that should not exist. And they know we are here. The walls of the cabin flexed with the cold and with whatever pressed against them. Haley's breath hitched into ragged little sobs, the kind that happen when your body tries to cry without making a sound. Connor stood in front of the door, eyes rolled a little too high, whispering those syllables he'd been mumbling in his sleep. I didn't recognize the language. I didn't want to. Something dragged a palm, or what passed for a palm, over the window glass. The sound was soft, papery, like a muth's wing amplified. Beneath it, I heard the timbers creak as weight leaned in. I thought of how far we were from anyone who could help, and how much farther from anyone who would believe us. The aurora outside pulsed slow and steady, A green lung inflating, a green lung deflating. It lit the tree line bright as a memory and dark as a lie. Back from the door, I whispered to Connor. He didn't move. His lips pressed around more of those sounds, and I realized he wasn't talking to us at all. He was answering something. Connor. I put my hand on his shoulder. His skin burned through the jacket. He flinched as if my touch were a sting and blinked himself back into the room. "You hear it?" he asked. "It's not outside. It's under everything." "I hear what's outside," I said, and shoved the bureau we'd dragged in front of the door another inch, then another. The knob squealed. The chorus swelled, a blend of wolf, throated howl and voice, box vowels, as if a choir of tall, hungry things had learned to sing from the echo of a human church. It rose and rose until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, and then, all at once, it cut off. The silence didn't feel like relief. It felt like a decision. We waited for the break, and that didn't come. I thought about Will and the way those limbs wrapped him, not like an animal pounce, but like roots tightening around a stone. I kept expecting to hear his voice, a muffled plea outside. I kept expecting to hear my own. Dawn came squinting over the ridges. The aurora peeled itself off the sky and folded away somewhere the sun couldn't follow. We cracked the door an inch, then two, then wide enough to slide our bodies through sideways. My breath smoked, then stopped smoking, then smoked again as if the air couldn't decide whether it wanted to be winter or a dream of winter. Around the cabin lay that ring of prints, a perfect band of elongated pads with splayed, almost human toes spread and thin crescent knives where claws bit in. No leading in, no leading out, just presence. The ring had thickened during the night, layered like growth rings in a tree. Where they stood, Haley whispered. Her face had the paper, white look of a person who hasn't slept in a long time and is lying to herself about it. Where they waited, we found Will's rifle half, buried in evergreen needles 30 yards off. The barrel was bent in a clean, smooth arc, like a straw someone had worried while thinking. Clamped around the stock was a braid. I wanted it to be willow. It was not willow. It had the dun, yellow sheen of connective tissue twisted on itself and tied with a knot no human hand would invent. We didn't talk for a while after that. The radio on the table gave a little crackle, and then a thread of voice pushed through a cheerful, practiced cadence giving a weather bulletin for the Alaska Territory, calling it that with the brightness of 1958. A high pressure moving in from the bearing, lows to -20. Travel advisory for sled freighting along a corridor that hasn't existed in my lifetime. The voice stuttered, reversed like a tape, and then bled into our era long enough to tell us there would be no flights into our sector due to maintenance at the Park Road runway. We were, the voice said, encouraged to remain calm. It didn't say why the encouragement felt like a dare. We took inventory. What we had, 3 days of rations if we stretched them hard, stove fuel for maybe 5, one rifle that wasn't bent, 2 flare guns with 4 flares total, a field kit heavy on plaster for tracks and light on courage, my notebooks, Haley's camera, Connor's sat phone that couldn't find a satellite anymore because the sky had apparently learned to lie to machines. What we didn't have, Will. What we couldn't count on the cabin holding another night if the decision in the dark turned into action. We make for the river, I said, saying it felt like lighting a match, just to prove the dark could be pushed back. Follow the flats south until we hit the old maintenance road along the Toklat. There used to be a ranger cache near a gravel bar. Even if the cache is gone, we can follow the river east. The Park Road bends there. Someone will be there. Or there will be the idea of someone, and sometimes that's the same thing. The valley doesn't want us to leave, Haley said. then we make the valley want something else. We packed in silence. We left behind anything that couldn't keep us alive. I put the braid in a sample bag, because that is what a scientist does. When faced with a thing that frightens him, he pretends he can measure it, and sometimes the pretense is enough to move you forward. Before we went, I walked a slow circle around the ring of prints. I didn't step on it. I didn't want to know what would happen if I broke it, or if it would reform around my boot and keep me like the night had kept Will. We moved in a tight file down through the blue shadow of spruce and alder. The snow here was powder on top and old glass beneath. Each step punched through to a crunch that sounded too loud. The world still didn't have birds. The world still didn't have the small scurrying sounds that make a big landscape feel less like a set and more like a place. Now and then I heard an extra footfall where none should be, a faint fourth beat tucked inside the three of ours, as if something had matched our cadence and learned the trick of footsteps, but not quite the rhythm. Each time I turned, there was nothing but long trees and the long, straight look of daylight that only comes when the sun low burns for hours. Close to midday, we reached a ridge that sloped to the river flats. The toklat ran braided, 1,000 thin ribbons of cold throwing light at the sky, each trying to find a way to be the river, and none succeeding for long. I'd worked river basins across the interior. You learn to read them the way you read faces. This one looked wrong. The main channel, the one that should have leaned east, leaned a little west. On the flats someone had built cairns. They lifted from the snow like vertebrae. Each was topped with something pale. As we neared, I could see they weren't stones at all, not all of them. The pale things were caribou phalanges, cleaned and polished as if licked by a patient fire. Haley stopped. "Don't touch them." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "They're arranging us," she said. "Like chess. We're the pieces. The board is the whole valley." I wanted to tell her that was irrational. Instead, I told her to drink water. We picked our way onto the flats. The snow was shallower here, wind scoured. Wind doesn't always answer to the same geography you do. It found us when everything else avoided us. It tugged at the hoods of our parkas and brought with it the smell of cold metal and something open, like the air inside a deep freezer when you've left it closed too long. We chose a braid to cross and found a log the river had thrown down as a mercy. Halfway across, I felt weight come onto it behind me, weight that did not belong to any visible body. The log dipped, my knees bent. Haley grabbed my pack. The air to my left changed. As if something exhaled with the sound turned off, I fired a flare into the water without thinking. It hit the surface, hissed, and guttered in a flare of chemical white. For an instant the braid glowed. Something moved through it like heat through glass. Clear, tall, the shape of a posture more than a body. Then the flame died and it was only water again, running toward a bend that bent the wrong way. We made the far bank with our hearts beating in our mouths. Under the lee of a low embankment, we took stock again. Connor had stopped shivering. That frightened me more than the shivering. He drew in his notebook, sketching a line of ridges and small arches like vertebrae or like the cairns we'd left behind. "We want to aim for this saddle," he said. He pointed to a gap along a ridge that none of us had been through, and that wasn't on my topo in the way he drew it. "If we cut there, we'll shave hours." "You've been through there?" I asked. He shook his head. "I've dreamed through there." The wind played a little scale in the snow grass. A mile downstream, a line of dark things moved along the willows. I raised the binoculars. At first I thought they were wolves, tall, rangy, but the gaits didn't match. The legs had too many bends in them. One of the things turned its head, and the motion was almost human in that it looked like a choice. It saw us. It paused. Then it kept moving. Not toward us, not away exactly. Just along, as if it had all day and all night and time was a kind of weather. We took Connor's shortcut. It was either that or stand where we were until the light failed, and there are places where staying still is the worst kind of motion. The saddle rose through stunted spruce and willow cut low by snow creep. Above treeline the land turned to a geology lecture. Broken schist and quartz veins like knuckles in the earth's fist. The wind consolidated into a howl of its own that sounded almost like the night. I kept my eyes on Connor's back and on Haley's boots. I counted steps. I counted breaths when steps didn't feel like enough. When I ran out of numbers, I made new ones. Numbers don't care who invents them. Halfway up, the extra footsteps returned. There, not there, there again, all while the ground under me told the simple truth of 3 sets of prints. My mind did the arithmetic. It did not like the answer. We reached the saddle in the flat gray of mid-afternoon that Alaska calls day. On the far side lay a ravine, a clean bite taken from the world by some old, slow catastrophe. The walls were striped with black and iron red, banded like the side of a sleeping creature. The bottom was drifted smooth, the kind of snow that looks like a duvet from a distance and a trap up close. At the mouth of the ravine, something had drawn a circle in ash. It lay just under the skin of wind-blown snow, a faint thread until you saw it, and then you could not stop seeing it. In one segment, prints like ours entered. In another segment, prints like ours left. The pieces between told a story with gaps. I didn't want to fill the gaps with imagination. I wanted very much to be unimaginative. That would have felt safer. We can go around, Haley said. Going around costs us daylight, I said. Daylight doesn't seem to matter here. She won that argument because she was right. We followed the rim, keeping the ash circle to our right. I watched it out of the corner of my eye. I half expected it to rearrange itself like iron filings dancing toward a magnet. It did not. The wind took little sips of it and carried it off into the ravine like ash from a long, cold fire. 100 yards farther, the first bell rang. We hadn't set bells. That didn't stop the sound from existing. It came from the ravine floor, then from behind us. Then, brightest of all, from somewhere inside the hollow of my own ear. Ding, 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 as if a string had been tied between my eardrum and some small metal thing and plucked. The pattern repeated 1, 2, 1. The air learned the pattern. The wind repeated it. The snow learned it. A moment later, so did the trees. Not a trick of branches. An answer. An answer to a bell that had never been rung and had rung the valley awake anyway. Connor began whispering again, low and steady, like a man reading a liturgy to himself. I didn't recognize the words. I recognized the cadence. He was matching the bells. Stop, I said. Connor, stop. He did, and his eyes looked too wet in his face. I didn't start it, he said. It started me. I took his pack strap and guided him forward. He let me. It felt like handling a sleepwalker who was dreaming his feet into existence with each step. Haley slipped on a rime stone and went to one knee. She hissed through her teeth. I'm fine. She wasn't. A half hour later, she wasn't pretending to be. Her ankle puffed inside her boot until the laces bit angry lines up her shin. I wrapped it with an elastic from the med kit, and we moved on, slower and lower and much less clever. The ravine pinched down into a kind of throat. I didn't want to go in there. The wind didn't want to either. It dodged the mouth and hissed along the rim instead. We didn't have choices left that felt like choices. The throat was where the ground allowed us to move without wading waist deep. The light greased itself along the snow and didn't stick anywhere. Halfway through that throat was an overhang, snow piled into a lip, with enough space under it to make a cramped shelter. if you didn't mind sharing the darkness with whatever preferred darkness. We minded. We chose it anyway. I carved a slot in the snowbank with my collapsible shovel, and we wriggled inside. The air tasted like the inside of an old freezer, and like an idea going stale. The tunnel curved left and opened into a pocket big enough to sit in side by side, knees up, backs bent against the packed snow. I struck the stove and set a pot to melt snow, and listened to how small that sound was in the new silence. Haley found the lantern. It lay in a shallow of the pocket, half encased in ice, brass gone black with time. Next to it were pages sealed inside a tin. The tin had the dull look of something that has survived by being forgotten. The pages weren't whole. The ink had bled wherever water could touch it. The parts we could read belonged to 1931, or to a hand that enjoyed pretending. The owner was a field man for a mining outfit and had been stranded after the spring breakup. He wrote about long quiet that hums, about dogs that will not look toward the hills, about man-sized shape traveling with the wolves but not with them. One of the nib passed so hard the nib had scored the paper, and the words came out even though the ink had given up. Do not say their names. What names? Haley asked, as if maybe the page would tell us if we were polite. The stove coughed once, blue flame guttering, then steadied. I spun the lantern's wheel and was surprised to hear felt resistance and then a catch. Something inside still had a taste of fuel, after almost a century or after a night. The mantle bloomed into light. The thin, insistent blue you see in a hospital lab, a flame that believes in itself with a fanatic's clarity. It pushed back the dark in a tight globe. The snow lit up around us with a depth that looked almost faceted, as if we sat inside a gem. That was when the first voice spoke right outside the tunnel. Nate. The word arrived with the ease of a friend. It arrived with Will's voice, sweetened by hope the way voices get when they believe you've been found and saved, and that both those things mean the same as the other. I snapped the lantern down to kill the glow, and my hand didn't move. It stayed on the valve, knuckles white, while some other part of me whispered that we should hide the light. My bones voted to keep it. Don't, Haley said into her teeth. Don't answer, Will, the voice said to itself, to us. It's me. I'm hurt. Help. The air in the tunnel tightened the way air does before lightning. That bell pattern rang once, twice, not in any place we could name, and then the voice learned the pattern and threaded it into the spaces between words. Help. Ding. Ding ding. Pete. Words and notes riding each other until meaning bent. Do not say their names, I said, barely a breath. Connor, those words you've been muttering, did you hear them from a voice that sounded like me? Or Haley? Or yourself? He put his hands over his ears. He shook his head as if to knock something loose. I hear them in the marrow, like the bones are a radio and the station is underneath hearing. Like the dream keeps going after I wake up, and the waking is the part that's pretend. The lantern cast our shadows against the snow, the three of us drawn tall and thin. A fourth shadow leaned across the tunnel mouth and didn't belong to anything I could point at. The tunnel ceiling groaned, a long glide of snow settling an inch. The lantern's flame fluttered and then pushed itself taller without consuming more fuel. It wasn't a trick of air. It was an act of will. The pocket grew warmer by exactly the amount a prayer warms a person, not enough to be proof, enough to keep your mouth working. The voice changed. Not Will anymore. Not anymore. It tried on my rhythms. It tried on Haley's lull of Appalachian vowels. It tried on the sound of Connor whispering to himself when he thought none of us were listening. Each time it wore us a little better, like a suit wrinkling into shape around a new body. I'm going to block the tunnel, I said. When I do, it's going to push back. "Don't you dare go out there," Haley said. "I'm not going out." I pulled the shovel close, then dropped it. A better barricade lay within reach of the packs. I dragged them into the mouth of the tunnel, stacking them in a tight wedge between us and the voice. The lantern light cut around the edges of the gear in thin, bright knives. I didn't want to know if those knives touched anything I couldn't see. The voice made one last attempt at being Will, the way a bad actor makes one last attempt at a line reading. Pain a little too polished. Affection a little too careful. Then it changed tactics. It said my name again and paired it with a syllable I'd never given anyone, the name my mother used when I broke a bone as a kid. Not Nathan. The one only she used, and only twice. It felt like a thumb pressed to a bruise. The tunnel learned the name and pressed it back at me from the packed snow. That was the first moment I truly believed we might not make it to another sunrise. We did. Weeks or minutes later, time had spent itself anyhow. The voice left the tunnel entrance the way a tide leaves. The bell pattern stumbled and then stopped. The wind remembered how to be wind and went on its way. When I finally allowed myself to breathe like a person, my lungs creaked. We slept in turns. Each time my eyes shut, I dreamt a map where the rivers ran in both directions at once and the roads refused to lead away. In one of the dreams, I watched Will walk across a snowfield, holding his arms out like a sleepwalker. He walked and never sank. His shadow had elbows in places elbows don't go. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and the sound of my own name buried in my teeth like a seed. By late light, we crawled out of the pocket. The ravine had changed. The ash circle at its mouth had slid 10 feet to the left, smudged, and then perfectly redrawn like a compass that insists on pointing where it wants. The prints we'd made along the rim had been copied below, line for line, as if the ravine had practiced being us half the night and was proud of the result. We moved fast, because sometimes the only way to not be a pattern is to act before the pattern learns you again. We made the lip and started down the far side. The slope slick with a glaze that looked like water and wasn't. Haley's ankle held just long enough to make me hopeful. Then it buckled. She cried out once and bit it off. I hauled her up by her pack straps, and we hobbled together like a six-legged animal that hadn't learned how to share a nervous system yet. "Stop," Connor said. His voice had gone flat. He stared across the slope at a stand of stunted spruce. Something stood among them, all too still. Its head tilted a fraction, and in that fraction was a whole grammar of hunger. It had Will's jacket on. It wore it with the loose wrongness of someone who knows clothes only as a rumor. The sleeves hung past where its hands ended, and from the sleeves jutted long pale lengths that were not bone, and were not branches, and were not anything the textbooks I'd loved could give me. "Don't look at its face," I said before I knew why I said it. Haley clapped a hand over her eyes and then made a small, animal sound anyway. Connor made no sound at all. His lips shaped one of his dream syllables, and the thing among the spruce cocked its head as if startled, as if delighted to hear a guest speak the house's language. It stepped forward. I raised the rifle, my hand steady because no part of me had room to shake. I sighted center mass. My finger tightened. It didn't fire. Not because I lost my nerve, because the metal of the trigger wasn't there. It had the slick feel of a thing that thinks it is a trigger, but has remembered at the last second that it is river water sliding over a stone. I tried again. The rifle remained a rifle by effort alone. The thing took another step and learned how to be Will, not by wearing his voice now, but by wearing the way his shoulders had always sat a little forward, as if braced for recoil or for an apology. "Connor," I said, "do not say the name that's in your mouth. It's in my bones." he said. He wasn't arguing. He was reporting. The lantern in my pack, old brass, blue flame. A mistake and a miracle. We'd left it on a low simmer to keep its mantle warm. I yanked it loose, turned the wheel hard. The flame punched bright. Not the cheery orange of a campfire, but laboratory blue. The color of something that wants to be exact more than it wants to be loved. The light skated over the snow and touched the thing in the trees. It flinched. Not much, enough. It tucked its head like an animal caught in a beam, and then smoothed itself into tall shadow, and then into nothing at all the way. A figure in your peripheral vision can decide a tree if you turn your face. Where it had stood, the snow showed prints that were not prints so much as small holes where the surface had chosen not to exist for a second. We ran. Not far, not fast. Fast enough to believe in the idea of a way for a few minutes. The slope broke under us into scrub. The scrub gave way to a low sweep of ground, sparkling with surface horror that turned every step into a risk. By the time we reached the shelter of a boulder field, the light had thinned to the color of old coins. 2 more miles to the river, maybe 4. The map in my head had stopped being a map and started being a hope. We stopped behind a boulder the size of a shed and tried to shrink ourselves into the shape of people the valley might ignore. Between one breath and the next, Connor wasn't beside us. He hadn't gotten up. He hadn't wandered. He had simply been here, and then a space existed where he was not. Then his voice came from beyond the boulder, speaking those syllables in a clear, calm tone, almost curious. A response rose from the rocks across from him, gentle and eager, like 2 old friends trying each other's names after a long time apart. I rounded the boulder. Connor stood at the edge of a slit in the ground, a narrow, perfect seam where frost had pried the world open. He leaned over it, whispering into the seam. The seam whispered back. As I lunged for him, something reached from the seam. I don't have better language. An arm, if an arm can be a temperature. A hand, if a hand can be the absence of light shaped into wanting. It touched his coat at the shoulder, and the fabric dimpled as if pressed by a finger that only existed from one angle. For a heartbeat, I saw the space beyond the seam. Not depth exactly, but a layering of the same ground slightly wrong over itself, like a stack of thin plates misaligned. Somewhere inside the layers, something that remembered wolves and remembered us, and remembered the weather that had been here before any of those things, smiled with a mouth it didn't need. I grabbed Connor's hood and yanked. The seam's hand, or the idea of it, slid off him like cold smoke off a river. He fell backward into me and we went down together, his elbow catching my ribs hard enough to make white static bloom behind my eyes. Haley scrambled around the boulder, lantern held low. The blue light fell into the seam, and the seam reacted like a drop note in a quiet room. It tightened, or the world tightened around it, and then the slit was only a line of shadow where snow had drifted into a crack and decided to be a crack for now. Connor sobbed once. "I didn't say it," he said, desperate for credit. "I didn't say it." "You almost did," I said. "That counts." We didn't try for the river again that night. We made a camp of it there. In the broken teeth of rock, the lantern tucked between us like a small animal we were tasked with keeping alive. The things on the ridgeline paced. They didn't approach. The blue light had opinion enough for all of us and made a circle the night pretended to respect. The wind sang the bell pattern once more. The mountains answered it, then grew bored. From some mile I couldn't name came a long sound like a whale's blow, but stretched thin, as if crossing land costed something. The sky tore itself open in faint aurora streamers and stitched itself shut again. Haley slept face down on her arms, the angle of her neck wrong in a way you only allow when you've run to the edge of yourself and found a little more. I watched the lantern flame, and the way it refused to flicker in drafts it should have respected. I thought of the man from 1931, and the dogs who wouldn't look toward the hills, and the line he'd pressed into paper, with nothing but pressure, "Do not say their names." The names wanted saying. That was how they worked. Like a hook laid out in words. Like a road that loops if you call it by the name on its first map. I held the words in my mouth and refused to know them. Somewhere close, the snow sighed and held a shape for a second. The print of a foot with too many joints. The suggestion of a knee that could bend any way it liked. And then the shape melted out of itself. I kept my finger through the lantern's carry ring until dawn, because that was one true thing left to do. And because I wanted the blue flame to know it wasn't alone in believing in itself. My name still belonged to me when dawn broke, and that counted as a victory. The three of us, if Connor still counted as three, sat stiff in the lee of the boulder field, the lantern's blue eye guttering low but steady. The creatures on the ridge never descended. They paced in silhouettes against the bruised sky, long limbed shadows that refused to belong to the trees. Their movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, as if they wanted us to see that they hadn't gone anywhere. As if they wanted us to know we were being allowed this morning. No more. Haley's ankle had swollen to the size of her boot top. She wouldn't say it, but she couldn't go far. Connor's eyes were raw and rimmed in red, his skin gray with fatigue. He had stopped whispering in his sleep, and I didn't know whether that meant the language was finished with him, or he was finished with it. Either way, I didn't trust the silence that pooled around him. I stoked the stove, boiled what little snow we dared scrape from the ground, and tried to talk like a leader. We'll follow the boulder field east. It'll drop us back toward the Talklet. Once we hit the gravel bars, there's a chance we'll find a ranger cache. Fuel, rations, maybe even a radio. Haley gave a dry laugh. A cache. You're saying salvation lives in a box someone buried here 50 years ago and forgot. That's exactly what I'm saying. The wilderness didn't disagree. It didn't agree either. It simply watched, wide and patient. We broke camp with numb fingers. Connor lagged behind, muttering that the seam in the ground hadn't been a crack at all, but a mouth. It spoke in reverse, he said. That's why I almost understood, because it was saying it backwards. I told him to shut up. He smiled as though I'd given him permission to continue. The boulder field gave way to a low swale where dwarf birch lay pressed to the ground by years of snow creep. The branches rattled in the wind like dry bones. We moved fast, though speed was relative. 3 limping shadows against a land too large to notice. By midday, the sky darkened. Not with clouds, but with the thin haze that comes before a storm you can't see yet. And then we found the antlers. They rose from the snow in a neat row, 12 racks of caribou antlers, planted like fence posts. Each skull was buried, each rack pointing inward to form a long corridor. The symmetry was surgical. The tines had been polished until they gleamed like ivory. Across their surfaces, lines were carved, spirals, hatch marks, patterns that twisted if you looked too long. I counted steps into the corridor. The wind hushed. My boots sank into snow that didn't crunch, didn't yield. It felt like walking across skin. Haley stopped dead. We don't go in there. We have to cross, I said. Unless you want to climb the ridge. She shook her head violently, clutching her parka tight around her throat. No, this isn't for us. This is theirs. Connor stepped forward without hesitation. His face slack, his gait steady, he walked between the antlers like a man entering a church. They've been waiting, he murmured. The wolves left the path for us. We're meant to follow. I grabbed him by the hood, yanking him back. His body went limp in my hands, as if he'd been waiting to be pulled. His pupils swallowed his irises. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. "The way it bends. The air's not air in there. It's..."
Shut up.
I forced him to the snow. "You say one more word like that, I leave you here. Do you understand me?" He nodded too quickly, too eagerly. We skirted the corridor, climbing the ridge after all. My lungs burned. Haley stumbled on her swollen ankle, but I preferred the pain of stone and slope to whatever waited inside that geometry of bone. From the top we looked back down. The corridor was gone. Where it had stood was only blank snow, flat and unbroken. None of us spoke for a long time. That night we made camp beneath a shallow overhang of granite. I built a fire of scrub birch, though I hated the idea of smoke announcing us. The flames seemed to die into the air before they rose, as if the wilderness disapproved of combustion. The heat barely reached our hands. Haley pressed her ankle close to the coals until the skin reddened. She didn't complain. Connor wandered from the fire, pacing the snow's edge, staring into the tree line. "They're closer," he said. "How do you know?" Haley asked. "Because they're in me." He looked at me when he said it, eyes glistening like wet stone. I pretended not to understand, but I did. I'd felt their presence since that first night, the ring of prints, the wrong carcass, the voices in the dark. I'd felt them edging nearer, testing us. And I wondered if Connor was right, if the real encirclement wasn't outside at all. The fire guttered low. The lantern blue in my pack pulsed faintly, responding not to my hand but to something else. And then from the ridge above came the sound of running. Not feet, not hooves. The hybrid cadence of both, pounding snow, drawing near. I grabbed the rifle, though by now I knew it could betray me. Haley reached for the flare gun. Connor only spread his arms, smiling wide as if welcoming old friends. Shapes burst from the tree line. Not wolves, not people, both. Their legs were jointed wrong, bent too many times. Their faces were stretched masks of fur and flesh. Some ran on 4 limbs, some on 2, some shifting mid-stride as if reality hadn't finished sculpting them. Their eyes burned pale white. Their mouths hung open, drooling steam. The fire sputtered and died. The lantern flared in my pack, bursting into furious blue. The creatures skidded to a halt at the edge of the light. They hissed. Not animal, not human, but a sound of frustration, like predators denied the final step of the hunt. They circled, pacing, testing the border of the glow. One stepped forward. Its face wore Will's. Not his body, just his face, stretched across the skull like parchment. His lips cracked into a grin. "Nathaniel," it said perfectly in his voice. Haley sobbed. Connor laughed. I raised the rifle, but the barrel warped again, softening, melting like wax. The bullet chamber was nothing but powder between my fingers. The thing laughed. My friend's laugh poured through a stranger's mouth. The lantern flared brighter. The blue bled outward, scorching snow into black glass. The creature shrieked, stumbling back. One collapsed, writhing, its form snapping between wolf, man, shadow, bone, and something with no name at all. Its skin peeled away in strips of smoke, vanishing before they hit the ground. The others retreated, screeching into the timberline until only silence remained. Connor stared at the blackened snow where the creature had died. "They don't want the light," he said, "but they'll learn. They always learn." That night none of us slept. I kept the lantern lit, blue flame trembling, fuel dwindling. Haley whispered prayers into her parka. Connor whispered something else. By dawn, the prints around our camp had formed another ring. Smaller this time, tighter, and inside the ring, directly in front of us, stood a cairn of stone topped with a single human tooth. I didn't recognize it, but Haley did. She touched her tongue to the side of her mouth, and her face went pale. One of her molars was missing. The The tooth on the cairn gleamed pale against the dawn. Haley's hand stayed pressed to her jaw, fingers trembling, as if she still didn't quite believe what she felt. I didn't want to believe it either. She hadn't screamed, hadn't woken bloody in the night. One of her teeth had simply ceased to belong to her and begun belonging to them. Connor bent close, his breath fogging the stone. "They're marking us," he said. "They've always marked us. The rings, the cairns, the ash circles, they're tallying pieces. They're making sure what goes in comes out different." I snapped him back by his collar. "Stop." But Haley's eyes met mine, and there was no defiance in them, no anger, only a plea. "Am I next?" I didn't answer. Scientists are supposed to trade in certainty, but there was nothing in me but ash. We packed fast. Every shadow on the ridge felt thick, swollen with watchers. The lantern burned low, fuel thinning, though its flame stayed stubbornly blue. I cradled it in one hand as if it were an infant, terrified of what would happen when it went out. We angled downslope toward the Talklat. The land rolled in waves of scrub and snow, dotted with half-buried stones like vertebrae breaking through flesh. My boots sank deep, pulling me slow, but the thought of stillness felt worse. Movement was the only defiance we had left. By midday we reached the gravel bars, wide tongues of frozen silt spreading across the valley. The Talklat itself had vanished into ice, broad plates of it ridged like scales, creaking beneath the sun. Beyond, on the far bank, stood something I had been praying for, a weathered cash box half hidden by drift. "See," I said, forcing a thin smile. "They do leave gifts." Haley hobbled faster despite her ankle. Connor followed without a word. The box was steel, rusted at the hinges, but still intact. My gloved hands tore it open with frantic hope. Inside it, tins of powdered milk, old packets of jerky hardened to stone, a stack of canvas tarps, a coil of rope, and, most blessed of all, a canister of stove fuel. Haley wept when she saw it. Connor only touched the rope with reverence. "They knew we'd need this," he said. "They?" I asked. "The ones who walked here before. The ones who watched. The ones who left the path behind." His voice shook with awe, not fear. "We're not the first. We're just the latest." The sun dragged itself sideways along the horizon, never rising, never falling. We decided to camp by the cache, though I hated the exposure of the open flats. But Haley couldn't walk farther, and Connor was too far gone into whatever trance held him. That night the bells returned. Not faint this time, not distant. Loud and insistent, a tolling from beneath the river ice. Ding, ding ding, ding. The sound shivered through the plates, rattling like chains. I knelt, pressing my palm to the surface, and the vibration hummed into my bones. Haley covered her ears. "Make it stop." Connor dropped to his knees, pressing his mouth to the ice. "It's a summons," he whispered. "They're calling us home." I tore him back, but when I looked down, the ice beneath, where he'd kissed it, had darkened. Circles spreading outward, the faint suggestion of shapes pacing beneath. Tall shapes jointed wrong, their faces flickering in pale light. They walked as if the river were glass, their eyes upturned to us. The lantern blazed, blue against the night. The shapes halted, then scattered into darkness. The bells cut off, the ice stilled. But I knew they weren't gone, only patient. We slept in shifts, though sleep was too generous a word. I lay against the cash box, rifle across my chest, lantern at my side. In the dream that found me, Will stood at the edge of the antler corridor, smiling. "You'll follow," he said, "because all things return. The valley doesn't let you out. It only lets you deeper." I woke with blood in my mouth and realized I'd bitten my tongue nearly in half. By morning, Haley was worse. Fever burned under her skin. The missing tooth had left no wound, no socket, just a smooth stretch of gum that looked healed years ago. She whispered names in her sleep, names I didn't recognize, syllables that tugged at the air like hooks. Connor grew restless, pacing the gravel bars. "They want her?" he said flatly. "She's marked. That's the bargain. If we give her..." I slammed him against the cash box before he could finish. "Say it, and I'll kill you." His grin widened. "You don't understand. They don't want us dead. They want us changed." The day passed under a sky that wouldn't shift. Light throbbed weak, as if the sun itself were failing. The valley stretched too far in every direction, a loop that never ended. No matter how long we walked, the ridges remained the same. I checked my compass. The needle spun lazy circles, uninterested in north. When dusk bled into more dusk, the voices began. At first, just one, Will's again, soft pleading. Then others, dozens, blending into a chorus. They called our names. Mine, Haley's, Connor's. They said them with tenderness, with hunger, with inevitability. Haley whimpered, clutching her ears. Connor smiled, mouthing the names with them. And I gripped the lantern until my knuckles cracked. The ring of prints formed around us once more. Pressed into the gravel this time, clear even on frozen silt. Inside the ring lay another cairn. Upon it, not a tooth, not bone, but a photograph. My photograph. One I'd taken years ago in Montana, of a wolf collared at dusk, eyes glowing in the flash. The image was crumpled, smeared with frost, but unmistakable. My hand shook as I picked it up. The back bore writing I had never made, "Do not say their names." The bells tolled again, louder than ever. The river ice cracked with each note. Connor dropped to his knees, screaming words he shouldn't have known, the air around him vibrating with each syllable. Haley sobbed, and I realized, with a clarity colder than any Alaskan night, that the valley wasn't just holding us. It was remaking us. The prints in the ring deepened. From them, shapes began to rise, slow, deliberate, pulling themselves out of absence into form. Tall, jointed wrong, their mouths stretched wide, already forming syllables. My name was on their lips. The lantern blazed so violently I thought the glass would shatter. Blue fire roared outward, a dome of impossible light. The creatures reeled back, shrieking. One collapsed, its body unraveling into ash and snow. Another staggered, shrank, and reformed into something smaller, pitiful, an echo of Will, crawling on all fours, whimpering like a wounded dog. Connor screamed with them, not in fear but in joy. "Do you see? They're not killing us. They're teaching us." I dragged Haley to her feet, half carrying her weight. "Move." The lantern light throbbed, straining, eating fuel too fast. The creatures pressed at its edge, claws scraping invisible walls. The bells grew deafening, shaking the river ice until fissures spider-webbed across its surface. We ran. Across the bars, into the timberline, stumbling through drifts that sucked at our legs. The bells followed, tolling not just in air but in bone. My teeth ached with each note. Haley moaned, her fever worsening, her words slurring into half prayers, half names. Behind us, Connor did not follow. I turned once. He stood in the ring, arms raised, face uplifted to the night. The creatures bent over him like priests at a baptism, their mouths stretching wide, and he welcomed them. He let them pour their language into him until his body shook like a conduit. His voice joined theirs, perfect and strong, and the wilderness answered. I wanted to go back. God help me, I almost did. But Haley's weight against me kept me moving, one step, then another, into a forest that did not belong to any map. The lantern burned low, blue flame guttering, but still it lived. Each time it flickered, shadows leaned closer. Each time it steadied, they fell back. And so we pushed on, deeper into a land that had stopped pretending to be Alaska, into a wilderness that remade itself with every step, where the trees leaned wrong and the snow whispered names. Somewhere behind us, Connor's voice rose higher, jubilant, carried on the bells. Somewhere ahead, the valley waited, endless, patient, and hungry. The wilderness of Alaska is endless when it chooses to be. That's what I understood, carrying Haley through the snow, lantern clutched to my chest like a beating heart. Every tree leaned toward us. Every drift shifted as though stirred by something beneath. The night never deepened, never lifted. Time was no longer ours, but a tightening of the throat, a slowing of steps, the steady dimming of a flame that was never meant to last. Haley's fever worsened. Her face was blotched red, her eyes rolling back, her lips cracked from whispering names. Names I couldn't hear clearly. Names that bent the air around her as she spoke them. I shook her every time her voice rose too loud, begged her to stop, but she clutched my sleeve with fingers like claws and whispered, "They're already inside me. What's left to keep out?" The forest thinned into another valley. The snow there was smooth as poured plaster, unbroken, yet my boots sank deep as if it wanted to drink me down. I dragged Haley forward, each step an act of will, and then, ahead, I saw light. Not aurora, not lantern glow, a cabin. It stood alone on the flats, smoke rising from its chimney. Yellow light burning steady in the windows. A ranger outpost. It had to be. It had the look of those old supply cabins, weathered boards, a pitched roof half swallowed in snowfall. Salvation. Haley, I whispered. We made it. Her head lolled against my shoulder. I stumbled faster, each breath tearing my throat raw. The lantern sputtered, its blue flame weakening, but the cabin's glow beckoned like a promise. I threw open the door warmth. Fire crackling, the smell of stew. On the table, a kettle steaming, coats hung on hooks by the wall. And, most impossibly, Will sitting by the fire smiling. He rose, spreading his arms. "Nathaniel, you found your way." Haley stirred weakly, lifted her head, and when she saw him she sobbed. "Will." I set her down on the bunk. My rifle slipped from my shoulder, forgotten. I wanted to collapse, to believe. But the lantern's blue flame shrieked in its glass. It guttered and flared as though raging against the sight. Will stepped closer. His eyes burned white in the firelight. His smile split too wide. "Lay it down," he said, nodding at the lantern. "You don't need it anymore." The fire popped. Sparks rose, but none of them faded. They hung in the air, suspended, twisting into shapes like runes, like letters of a language not mine. The walls of the cabin seemed to lean, to breathe. Haley whispered a name. The fire roared brighter. Will's smile stretched until his cheeks tore in blood shadow. I backed toward the door, lantern raised. The light fought the room, casting it into blue angles, stripping away its disguise. For a moment I saw the truth. There was no cabin, no fire, no Will. We stood in a hollow of snow, black cairns rising around us, each crowned with teeth. The fire was a circle of burning bones, the smoke made of voices. The bunks were slabs of ice, each etched with human faces pressed beneath the surface. And Will, what I had called Will, was taller than the trees, his limbs bending in ways that made the world recoil. His head tilted, eyes blazing. His mouth opened wider and wider until the whole valley sang with the sound. I staggered back, lantern blazing. Haley screamed. The thing that wore Will stepped into the circle of blue light. Its flesh rippled, skin shuddering like cloth in a storm. It screamed, not in rage but in hunger, in denial of what the light refused to allow. Its mouth snapped shut, its body contorted, limbs twisting until they broke and reformed. The sound was bone grinding on bone. Haley crawled toward it, tears streaking her cheeks. "Take me," she begged. "If that's the bargain, take me." I grabbed her, hauled her back.
"No."
She thrashed in my grip, her voice raw.
"You can't stop it."
They marked me. They're inside me. You think you can carry me out, Nathaniel? You think there's an out left? This is all there is. This is the world now. The thing lunged, The lantern flared so bright it felt like staring into a star. For an instant, everything froze. The cairns, the faces in the ice, the runes in the air. The entire valley held its breath, and then the glass shattered. Blue fire poured out, a flood of light that burned snow to vapor, stone to ash. The creatures shrieked, dozens of them, hundreds, their forms tearing apart like paper in flame. The cairns toppled, the bells cracked into silence, the valley convulsed. When the light died, the lantern was gone. Silence. I stood on bare rock. No snow, no forest. Just gray stone stretching in every direction, flat and endless, beneath a sky the color of old steel. Haley lay beside me motionless. Her face was pale, her chest rising faintly. I touched her cheek. Cold but alive. Connor's voice carried across the emptiness. I turned. He stood far off, arms raised, surrounded by shadows that clung to him like smoke. He was smiling, rapturous. "Do you see?" he shouted. "We're inside the name now."
We've become it.
His voice echoed, splitting into layers. The shadows moved with him, forming and unforming. Then, with a final cry, he dissolved into them, gone. I carried Haley. There was no direction to follow, no compass to trust. The land stretched infinite. Once, I thought I saw mountains on the horizon, but they slid away as I walked. Once, I thought I saw the Toklat again, flowing both ways at once, but when I blinked it was gone. Time passed. Minutes. Years. I don't know. The sky never changed. My legs moved because stopping was worse. At last I saw a shape ahead. A ranger cabin, the same as before. Smoke curling from its chimney, light glowing in the windows. I stopped. My knees buckled. I laughed broken hollow. Haley stirred in my arms, her eyes opened. They burned pale white. "It's time," she whispered. I dropped her, staggered back. Her body rose from the ground, lifted by nothing, her limbs bending too far. Her mouth opened wide, and from it poured the sound of bells. Ding, ding, ding. The sky answered. The land shifted, stone rippling like water. The air filled with voices, mine among them, calling my name. I clutched my head screaming, but the sound was drowned. The last thing I saw before the world folded was Haley's face. No longer hers, but stretched, twisted, smiling with hunger. And then the wilderness closed its mouth around me.